Hello students, today we are going to write a program to print this pattern on console, and here the number of rows has to be taken from the user. So this pattern is quite famous in basic programming. So here we would be using a nested loop to print this pattern on the console. What is a nested loop? A nested loop is when we write an internal loop within an external loop. Is called a nested loop. So here, if you see, there is a relation between the row number and the number of asterisks in that row. So the first row of this pattern contains a single asterisk. The second row contains two asterisks. Third row contains three asterisks. So likewise, ith row of this pattern would contain I asterisks. So when such a pattern is such a relation between the ith row and the number of asterisks is there, then we can use a nested loop to print such pattern. So in the nested loop, the outer loop would be running as many times as there are number of rows in this pattern, and the inner loop would be running as many times as there are number of asterisks in a certain row. So let us go ahead and write the code, and then I would explain the logic behind printing this pattern using nested loop. So we would start with declaring a loop variable, rather two loop variables, one for inner loop and another for outer loop. So here we would be using a for loop. So as I said, the outer loop would run as many times as there are number of asterisks in the pattern. So the number of rows in the pattern. So there are n rows. Yeah, so one thing that I forgot is to take the number of rows from the user. Number of rows in the pattern would be given by the user. So that is what we need to get from the user. So let us declare a variable num in which I get the user input. So I prompt the user to enter number of rows, and then using scanf function would collect it, the num variable ampersand num, and now so the user, after entering the number of rows, this loop has to be run for num times. Whatever number of rows that a user has entered, that many times the outer loop should run. So I'd initialize the loop variable with 1, and the stopping condition should be I less than equals to num. Now I should increment it by 1 after every loop. Now this outer loop, this outer loop, and it would run for num number of times. Now within that we would write another loop, and this is called nesting of the loops. So now our job is to run this inner loop as many times as there are number of asterisks in a certain row. So number of asterisks in ith row is I. So this loop should run I times. So here I represents row number, and for printing number of asterisks in ith row, this loop would help us. So within that we would be writing the code which would print the asterisks in the console. So here we would start the inner loop with 1, and as we want it to run for I times, so the stopping condition would be j less than equals to I. and the loop variable of inner loop would be incremented by 1. Now within this, so as I said, this is for printing the asterisks in a single row, in a ith row. So we would write printf asterisk and we would provide a space, because every asterisk here has got a space in between, right? If you see, so there is a space in between, so we will provide a space over here. Now after printing a certain row, what we need to do is to come to the next row, right? So we'll have to enter a line feed after every row. So for entering line feed, this loop would print a row, and after that we would write a printf \n, which should provide a line feed after a row is printed on the console. Now we are done with the code. At last I write catch. Now let us build it and see if it is working fine or not. So build is done. Now enter number of rows. Let's say the user enters 6. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So our program has worked correctly and the pattern is correct. Let us run it one more time with some different value of rows. Let's say 10. So it is working fine. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. So it is working fine. So in this code we have learned to write nested loop, and the nested loop can solve the problems in which pattern problems in which there is a relation between I, that is I of ith row, and the number of asterisks, or for that matter any symbol in that row. So this is it. Thank you. We would be seeing more this pattern problems in next sessions. So keep watching. Thank you.